The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Catherine walked slowly along the familiar stone pathways. Her fingers traced the rough edges of the ancient walls, feeling the weight of centuries beneath her touch. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and golden leaves danced in the gentle breeze that swept across the grounds she had come to know so intimately over the years. William found her there, standing beneath the old oak tree where they had shared countless quiet moments away from the relentless gaze of cameras and the demands of royal duty. His footsteps on the gravel path announced his approach, but Catherine didn't turn around immediately. She knew from the heaviness in his stride that he carried news that would change everything. "The doctors called this morning," William said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he came to stand beside her. The words hung in the air between them like morning mist, delicate yet unmistakably present. Catherine finally turned to face him, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of her own fears and the unspoken understanding that their world was about to shift in ways they could never have imagined. The diagnosis had been swift and merciless. What had begun as routine tests following months of subtle symptoms had revealed a truth that neither of them was prepared to face. The medical team had been thorough, compassionate, and brutally honest about what lay ahead. Time, they explained, was no longer an endless resource to be taken for granted. In the days that followed, the couple retreated from public view with an explanation that spoke of rest and family time. Palace officials carefully managed the narrative, protecting the privacy that had become so precious to them both. But behind the closed doors of their private apartments, William and Catherine grappled with a reality that no amount of royal training could have prepared them for. Catherine's strength surprised even those closest to her. She approached the news with the same grace and determination that had defined her years as a member of the royal family. There were tears, of course, shed in the quiet moments when the weight of it all became too heavy to bear alone, but there was also an unexpected sense of clarity, a sharpening of focus that helped her see what truly mattered in the time they had left. William struggled differently, his protective instincts warring with a helplessness he had never experienced before. He was a man accustomed to solving problems, to finding ways forward even in the most challenging circumstances. But this was beyond his control, beyond the reach of royal influence or personal determination. All he could do was be present, to love fiercely and to make every moment count. The children were told with gentle honesty, their questions answered with age-appropriate truth wrapped in reassurance. George, Charlotte, and Louis responded with the resilience of youth, though the eldest began to understand the gravity of what was happening in ways that broke his parents' hearts. Family time became sacred, each shared meal and bedtime story taking on new significance. As news of Catherine's condition began to spread within the inner circles of the royal household, an atmosphere of profound sadness settled over the palaces. Staff members who had served the family for years found themselves struggling to maintain their professional composure. The warmth and genuine kindness that Catherine had shown to everyone from senior courtiers to kitchen staff had earned her a place in their hearts that went far beyond duty or protocol. Queen Elizabeth, in her final years, had often spoken of Catherine's natural grace and her ability to modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions. Now facing the prospect of losing someone who had become not just a daughter-in-law, but a trusted confidant and friend, the royal family drew together in a way that transcended formal hierarchies and ancient protocols. The medical team worked tirelessly to explore every possible treatment option, consulting with specialists around the world and investigating cutting-edge therapies that might offer hope. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that their efforts, while providing comfort and additional precious time, could not alter the ultimate outcome. Catherine used this time to complete projects that had been close to her heart, working with charities focused on children's mental health and early childhood development. She wrote letters to her children to be opened on significant future milestones, carefully crafting words of love and guidance for moments she would not be there to share in person. Each letter was a gift across time, a way of ensuring her presence would continue to shape their lives long after she was gone. The private family moments became increasingly precious as Catherine's energy began to wane. Quiet afternoons in the garden, reading stories aloud and simply being together, took on an almost sacred quality. William learned to treasure the sound of her laughter, the way she hummed softly while arranging flowers, and the gentle touch of her hand in his during the long, Quiet evenings they spent together. Public appearances became more carefully managed and less frequent, though Catherine insisted on fulfilling commitments that were particularly meaningful to her. Each appearance was met with overwhelming public support, as people around the world began to sense that something significant was happening, even though the full truth remained carefully guarded by palace communications. The strength of their marriage, tested by years in the public eye and the unique pressures of royal life, revealed itself fully during this trial. They had always been partners, but now they became something deeper, two souls supporting each other through the most profound challenge either had ever faced. Their love, matured through years of shared responsibility and public service, provided a foundation that remained unshakable, even as everything else seemed uncertain. As autumn deepened into winter, the family adapted to a new rhythm of life that revolved around making the most of each day together. The palace became a sanctuary where love and laughter still echoed through the halls, even as an underlying sadness began to permeate the very stones of the ancient buildings that had witnessed so much history, and were now witnessing one of its most poignant chapters. The ancient corridors of Buckingham Palace had witnessed many moments of profound change throughout the centuries, but the quiet conversations taking place behind closed doors carried a weight that seemed to press against the very walls themselves. Senior palace officials gathered in the private secretary's office, their faces etched with concern as they began the delicate process of preparing for what was to come. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, spoke in measured tones as he outlined the unprecedented situation they faced. Never in recent royal history had they needed to prepare for such a deeply personal loss while maintaining the dignity and continuity that the public expected from the monarchy. The conversations were conducted with the utmost discretion, each person present understanding the gravity of their responsibility to protect the family's privacy while ensuring the institution remained strong. Catherine's own private secretary worked closely with her to ensure that every detail of her final wishes would be honored. They spent hours together in the small sitting room that had become Catherine's preferred workspace, going through correspondence from charities, reviewing her patronages, and making arrangements for the smooth transition of her responsibilities. Catherine's attention to detail and concern for others remained unwavering, even as her physical strength began to diminish. The logistics of royal protocol during times of mourning were complex and steeped in tradition, but this situation required a more personal touch than anything outlined in the official procedures. Catherine had specific requests about how she wanted to be remembered, and these wishes were carefully documented and shared with the appropriate teams. She wanted her final public appearances to celebrate the causes she had championed rather than focusing on her illness, and palace communications worked to honor this desire. William found himself caught between his roles as a devoted husband and as a future king who needed to ensure continuity for the monarchy. He spent long hours with constitutional experts and advisors, discussing how to manage the transition period and maintain stability during what would undoubtedly be a time of national mourning. The burden of these responsibilities weighed heavily on him, but he drew strength from Catherine's example of grace under pressure. The Queen, despite her own advancing age, became a source of wisdom and support during this difficult time. Her decades of experience in navigating personal loss while maintaining public duty provided invaluable guidance. She spent private moments with Catherine, sharing stories of her own experiences, and offering the kind of comfort that could only come from someone who truly understood the unique challenges of royal life. Palace staff began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere throughout the royal residences. There was a heightened sense of purpose in everyone's work, as if they all understood they were part of something historically significant. Housekeepers took extra care in preparing Catherine's rooms, gardeners paid special attention to the flowers she loved most, and kitchen staff prepared her favorite meals with particular devotion. The security arrangements required careful consideration as the family's need for privacy increased. Additional measures were put in place to protect them from unwanted intrusion, while still allowing for the necessary movement between their various residences. The protection officers who had served the family for years found their role expanding beyond physical security to include emotional support, as they witnessed firsthand the family's struggle with their private grief. Communications between the palace and government officials increased as preparations were made for the inevitable state ceremonies that would follow, the complexity of organizing events that would honor Catherine's memory, while managing the attendance of world leaders and foreign dignitaries required months of advanced planning. Every detail needed to be perfect, as the world would be watching during what would be one of the most significant royal events in decades. Catherine's medical team worked closely with palace officials to ensure that her care remained the top priority while also providing realistic timelines for the various preparations that needed to be completed. The delicate balance between hope and practical planning required constant adjustment as her condition evolved. The doctor's professionalism and compassion helped the family navigate the difficult decisions that arose along the way. The media management strategy became increasingly complex as public interest in Catherine's reduced appearances grew. Palace communications worked to maintain the careful balance between satisfying public concern and protecting the family's privacy. Press releases were crafted with extraordinary care, each word chosen to convey appropriate information without revealing more than the family was comfortable sharing. International relations also required attention as foreign royal families and heads of state began reaching out with offers of support and expressions of concern. The diplomatic protocols surrounding illness and potential mourning needed to be carefully managed to maintain the relationships that were so important to the monarchy's role on the world stage. The Archbishop of Canterbury became a regular visitor to the palace, providing spiritual guidance and support to the family during this challenging time. His presence brought comfort not only to Catherine and William, but also to the staff members who were struggling with their own emotions as they watched someone they had come to love face such a difficult journey. Planning committees worked discreetly to ensure that every aspect of future ceremonies would reflect Catherine's personality and contributions to the monarchy. Her love of music, flowers, and children influenced many of the decisions being made, ensuring that any public commemoration would truly honor the woman she was rather than simply following traditional protocols. The children's education and emotional support became a priority that required careful coordination between their schools, their protection officers, and child psychologists who specialized in helping young people cope with loss, creating a stable environment for George, Charlotte, and Louis while allowing them to process their emotions naturally required the expertise of many different professionals working together. As winter gave way to early spring, the preparations continued with quiet efficiency. Everyone involved understood that they were not just planning ceremonies and managing logistics. They were helping to create a legacy that would honor one of the most beloved members of the royal family in modern times. The weight of this responsibility brought out the best in everyone involved, as they worked together to ensure that Catherine's final chapter would be written with the same grace and dignity that had defined her entire time as a member of the royal family. The spring morning was perfect in the way that only English springs could be. Soft sunlight filtering through new leaves, the air crisp but warming, and daffodils nodding gently in the breeze that swept across the grounds of the children's hospital. Catherine stood at the window of the car, watching the familiar scene unfold as they approached the building where she had spent so many meaningful hours over the years. This would be her final official public engagement, though the crowds gathering outside were unaware of the significance of the moment. To them, it appeared to be another of the princess's regular visits to support the causes close to her heart. The children's mental health charity had been one of her most passionate commitments, and she had insisted that this visit go ahead despite her medical team's gentle suggestions that she might want to consider reducing her schedule. William walked beside her as they entered the hospital, his protective presence subtle but unmistakable to those who knew them well. The staff members who greeted them had worked with Catherine for years, and they could see the changes that others might miss, the slight hesitation in her step, the way she paused just a moment longer to gather her strength before each interaction, the increased intensity in her eyes as she focused on making every conversation count. The children they met that day sensed nothing unusual beyond Catherine's characteristic warmth and genuine interest in their stories. She sat with a 7-year-old boy who was struggling with anxiety, listening intently as he explained his fears about starting at a new school. Her responses were thoughtful and encouraging, drawing from her own experiences as a mother and her years of working with young people facing similar challenges. In the art therapy room, Catherine joined a group of teenagers who were using creative expression to process their emotions. She picked up a brush and added gentle strokes to a collaborative painting, her contributions blending seamlessly with the bold colors and expressive lines created by the young artists around her. The resulting piece would hang in the hospital's main corridor for years to come, a lasting reminder of her final visit. The hospital's director accompanied Catherine through each ward, marveling at her ability to connect with patients and staff alike, despite what he now knew she was facing personally. Her questions about new treatment programs and funding initiatives were as detailed and insightful as ever, demonstrating her continued commitment to the work even as her own world was shifting beneath her feet. During a private moment in the hospital's chapel, Catherine sat quietly in one of the simple wooden chairs, her hands folded in her lap as she gazed at the stained glass window that cast colored light across the peaceful space. William found her there, and they shared a few minutes of silence together, both understanding without words the poignancy of this final official act of service. The media coverage of the visit was extensive but respectful, with photographers capturing Catherine's radiant smile and obvious joy in her interactions with the children and staff. The images that appeared in newspapers and online would later take on additional significance, as people recognized them as among the last public photographs of the princess in her role as a working member of the royal family. After leaving the hospital, Catherine made an unannounced stop at the local primary school that she had visited several times over the years. The head teacher was delighted but surprised by their arrival, quickly gathering the children who had met the princess during previous visits. Their excited faces and enthusiastic questions brought genuine laughter from Catherine, and she spent nearly an hour in their classroom, reading stories and listening to their own tales of achievement and aspiration. The spontaneous nature of the school visit reflected Catherine's desire to make her final public appearances as natural and joyful as possible. She wanted to be remembered not as someone defined by illness, but as someone who had found genuine pleasure in serving others and connecting with people from all walks of life. The journey back to the palace was quiet, with Catherine resting her head against the car window and watching the familiar London streets pass by. She had traveled these roads thousands of times over the years, but today she found herself noticing details that had previously escaped her attention. The way the afternoon light fell across the park, the expressions on the faces of people walking along the sidewalks, the timeless beauty of the architecture that had witnessed so much history. That evening, Catherine and William hosted a private dinner for the senior staff members who had supported her charitable work over the years. The gathering was informal and intimate, held in one of the smaller dining rooms at Kensington Palace. The conversation flowed naturally between memories of successful projects, funny moments from various engagements, and plans for continuing the work that Catherine had started. Her private secretary presented her with a leather-bound book containing letters and messages from all the charities and organizations she had supported. The pages were filled with heartfelt thanks and stories of lives that had been changed through her involvement. Catherine read several of the messages aloud, her voice steady but emotional as she shared the impact that her work had apparently had on others. The children joined the adults for dessert, their presence bringing lightness and laughter to what could have been a somber occasion. Charlotte insisted on showing Catherine a drawing she had made that afternoon, while Louis climbed onto his mother's lap to share a story about his day at school. George, increasingly aware of the gravity of the situation, stayed close to his parents throughout the evening, his protective instincts already emerging despite his young age. As the evening wound down, Catherine took a few minutes to speak privately with each staff member, thanking them personally for their dedication and friendship over the years. Her words were heartfelt and specific, demonstrating how closely she had paid attention to their individual contributions and personal circumstances. Many of them would later say that these brief conversations were among the most meaningful moments of their professional careers. The photographs from that final public day would be carefully preserved in the royal archives, but more importantly, they would live on in the memories of everyone who had the privilege of witnessing Catherine's grace and strength during what they now understood had been her farewell to the public service that had defined so much of her adult life. Later that night, as Catherine prepared for bed, she spent a few extra minutes at her dressing table, looking at her reflection in the antique mirror that had been a wedding gift from the Queen. The woman looking back at her bore the signs of the journey she was on, but her eyes still held the spark of purpose and love that had carried her through more than a decade of royal duty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she felt the satisfaction of having given her best to the very end. The old nursery at Anmer Hall had always been Catherine's favorite room in their Norfolk home. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the comfortable chairs where she had spent countless hours reading to her children when they were smaller. Now, as spring turned toward summer, this peaceful sanctuary became the heart of their family's most precious time together. Catherine had chosen to spend these final months away from the formal constraints of palace life. Surrounded by the simple pleasures that had always brought her the greatest joy, the Norfolk countryside provided a buffer from the outside world, allowing the family to create their own rhythm of days filled with love, laughter, and the kind of ordinary moments that suddenly seemed extraordinarily precious. Mornings began gently, with William bringing Catherine tea in the delicate china cup that had belonged to his grandmother. They would sit together in the garden room, watching the birds at the feeders and planning their day around Catherine's energy levels and the children's activities. These quiet conversations became their most treasured time, when they could speak openly about their fears and hopes without needing to maintain the brave faces they wore for others. George had taken on new responsibilities around the house with surprising maturity, helping his younger siblings with their morning routines and ensuring they understood the importance of spending quality time with their mother. His natural leadership qualities, so reminiscent of his father, emerged as he became a bridge between the adult world of worry and the children's world of innocent questions and unconditional love. Charlotte's artistic nature found new expression as she created drawings and paintings specifically for her mother. Each afternoon she would present Catherine with her latest creation, explaining in detail the colors she had chosen and the stories behind her pictures. These artworks covered the walls of Catherine's bedroom, creating a gallery of love that brought smiles even on the most difficult days. Louis, still young enough to live fully in the present moment, continued to approach each day with the enthusiasm and energy that had always delighted his parents. His innocent questions about why Mummy needed to rest more often were answered with gentle honesty, and his ready acceptance of the situation provided a model of resilience that amazed the adults around him. The family established new traditions during this time, understanding instinctively that they were creating memories that would need to last a lifetime. Evening story time became an elaborate affair, with William and Catherine taking turns reading from classic children's books, while the three children snuggled close on the large sofa in the sitting room. Catherine's voice, though sometimes weaker than before, still carried the warmth and expression that made every story come alive. Weekends brought visits from close family members who had been carefully briefed about Catherine's condition. William's father arrived with barely contained emotion, his usual formality giving way to genuine affection as he spent time with his daughter-in-law and grandchildren. These visits were bittersweet, filled with love but shadowed by the unspoken knowledge that such gatherings would not continue indefinitely. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, became regular fixtures at Anmer Hall, providing practical support and emotional stability for the entire family. Carol's presence was particularly comforting to Catherine, as only a mother could be during such a difficult time. Their conversations often took place in the kitchen, where they had shared so many ordinary moments over the years, the familiar routine of preparing meals together, providing a sense of normalcy amidst the uncertainty. The garden became Catherine's special project during these months, as she worked with the children to plant flowers and vegetables that would bloom and grow long after she was gone. Each seed they planted together carried the promise of future beauty, and Catherine used these gardening sessions to talk with her children about cycles of life and the ways that love continues even when physical presence ends. Photography took on new importance as William documented their daily life with an intensity he had never felt before. Every smile, every shared joke, every quiet moment of connection was captured, creating a visual diary that would become one of their most treasured possessions. The children, initially camera-shy, gradually became comfortable with their father's constant documentation, understanding somehow that these pictures were gifts to their future selves. Cooking together became a family activity that brought everyone into the kitchen for collaborative meal preparation. Catherine taught Charlotte her grandmother's recipe for shortbread, while George learned to make his father's favorite soup. These practical skills were passed down with stories about family history and traditions, ensuring that the children would carry forward not just recipes but the memories associated with them. The evenings often ended with family music sessions, with William playing piano, while Catherine and the children sang along to familiar songs. Catherine's love of music had always been an important part of their family life, and these impromptu concerts became some of their most joyful moments together. Even as her voice grew softer, her presence during these musical interludes remained strong and inspiring. Letters arrived daily from friends and supporters around the world, but Catherine was selective about which correspondence she chose to read. She preferred messages from the charities she had supported and from families who had been helped by her various initiatives. These letters reminded her of the positive impact her work had achieved and provided comfort during moments when pain or fatigue threatened to overwhelm her spirits. The local community in Norfolk had always respected the family's privacy, but during this time their support became even more meaningful. Local farmers would leave fresh produce at the gate. The village church included the family in their prayers without fanfare, and shopkeepers in nearby towns offered warm smiles and kind words when William ventured out for errands. Sleep became increasingly precious and sometimes elusive, so Catherine developed a routine of late-night conversations with William about their shared memories and dreams for their children's futures. These intimate talks, conducted in whispered tones while the rest of the house slept, became the foundation for the detailed letters and recordings that Catherine was preparing for significant milestones in her children's lives. Medical visits continued, but they were conducted as discreetly as possible to maintain the peaceful atmosphere of their family retreat. The healthcare team traveled to Norfolk rather than requiring the family to return to London, understanding that Catherine's emotional well-being was as important as her physical care during this final stage of her journey. As summer deepened, the garden that Catherine and the children had planted together began to show the first signs of the beauty that was to come. Watching the small green shoots emerge from the soil became a daily ritual for the entire family, a tangible reminder that life continues and flourishes even in the midst of loss and sorrow. The summer heat had given way to the gentle coolness of early September, when Catherine made the decision that it was time to return to Windsor. The flowers in the Norfolk garden were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a testament to the hope and love that had been planted in the spring. But she felt a pull toward the place that had become her true home over the years, where the walls held the memories of her happiest moments as a member of the royal family. The journey south was made in comfortable stages, with frequent stops to rest and enjoy the English countryside that Catherine had come to love so deeply. William had arranged for the route to take them past some of their favorite places, the small village where they had attended their first royal engagement together, the country house where they had spent their first anniversary, and the school where Charlotte had performed in her first Christmas play. Windsor Castle welcomed them back with its familiar sense of timeless stability. The staff had prepared Catherine's favorite rooms with particular care, filling them with flowers from the gardens she loved and ensuring that every detail contributed to her comfort and peace of mind. The ancient stones seemed to embrace them, offering the protection and continuity that only centuries of history could provide. The children adapted to their new surroundings with the resilience that had characterized their entire journey through this difficult time. George took responsibility for ensuring his younger siblings felt secure, while Charlotte found new inspiration in the castle's art collection, and Louis discovered endless entertainment in the vast corridors and hidden alcoves that had fascinated royal children for generations. Catherine's medical team established a discreet presence at the castle, ensuring that she had access to every comfort measure available while maintaining the dignity and privacy that remained so important to her. The focus had shifted entirely to managing pain and preserving quality of life, with everyone understanding that cure was no longer possible, but comfort and peace were still achievable goals. Family members began arriving from various parts of the country and beyond, each visit carefully coordinated to maximize Catherine's energy and minimize disruption to the children's routines. These gatherings took on the quality of celebrations rather than vigils, as Catherine insisted that they focus on joy and shared memories rather than sorrow and impending loss. The Queen, despite her own physical limitations, spent increasing amounts of time at Windsor, providing both practical support and emotional strength to the family. Her presence brought a sense of continuity and purpose that helped everyone navigate the complex emotions of watching someone they loved prepare for the ultimate journey. Her decades of experience in managing personal grief while maintaining public responsibility offered invaluable guidance. During these final weeks, William found himself managing an impossible balance between his roles as devoted husband, protective father, and future king who needed to ensure the monarchy's stability during the transition ahead. His strength came from Catherine herself, whose grace and acceptance of her situation provided a model of dignity that inspired everyone around her. The chaplain at Windsor became a regular presence, offering spiritual comfort, not just to Catherine but to the entire family. His gentle wisdom and deep faith provided a framework for understanding their experience within a larger context of meaning and hope. The conversations they shared explored questions of legacy, purpose, and the ways that love transcends physical existence. Catherine spent hours working on the letters and video messages she was preparing for her children's future milestones. Each message was carefully crafted to offer guidance, encouragement, and love for specific moments in their lives: graduations, weddings, the birth of their own children, and countless other occasions when a mother's voice would provide comfort and wisdom. The gardens at Windsor provided a peaceful sanctuary where Catherine could spend time outdoors when her energy permitted. The Rose Garden, in particular, became a favorite spot where she would sit with William in the late afternoons, watching the play of light and shadow as the sun moved across the ancient walls. These quiet moments together required no words, as their love communicated itself through simple presence and shared understanding. Photographers were granted one final session to capture official portraits that would serve as Catherine's lasting image for historical records. The resulting photographs showed a woman of remarkable beauty and strength, her eyes reflecting both the sadness of goodbye and the peace that comes from a life well lived. These images would become iconic, representing not just her personal journey but the dignity and grace that defined her entire time as a member of the royal family. The administrative details of succession and transition were handled with quiet efficiency, ensuring that Catherine's patronages and charitable commitments would continue seamlessly under new leadership. Her personal involvement in these arrangements demonstrated her continued commitment to the causes she had championed. Even as her own time grew short, music continued to play an important role during these final days, with William often playing gentle melodies on the piano in Catherine's room. The familiar sounds of her favorite pieces provided comfort and connection to happier times, while new compositions created especially for this period offered solace and beauty during the most difficult moments. The children's education continued with tutors who understood the unique circumstances of their situation. Academic lessons were balanced with emotional support and creative expression, ensuring that George, Charlotte, and Louis could continue to grow and develop even as they prepared for the profound loss that lay ahead. Catherine's appetite remained limited, but meals became opportunities for family connection rather than concerns about nutrition. The kitchen staff prepared small portions of her favorite foods, understanding that the act of sharing meals together was more important than the amount consumed. These intimate dinners in her private dining room became precious rituals of togetherness. Sleep patterns became irregular as medication schedules and physical discomfort disrupted normal rhythms. But the night hours also brought some of the most tender moments between Catherine and William. Their whispered conversations in the darkness covered everything from practical arrangements for the children's futures to deeply personal expressions of love and gratitude for the years they had shared together. The medical team maintained constant but unobtrusive monitoring, adjusting treatments and medications to ensure Catherine's maximum comfort, while allowing the family to maintain as normal a routine as possible. Their professional compassion and expertise provided crucial support during a time when every decision carried emotional weight beyond its medical significance. As the days grew shorter and the leaves began to change color in the Windsor Gardens, everyone who loved Catherine understood that their time together was becoming precious in ways that transformed ordinary moments into sacred memories that would last lifelong. The October morning broke crisp and clear over London, with an unusual quiet settling over the city as news spread that Catherine had passed peacefully in her sleep at Windsor Castle, surrounded by her family. The announcement came through official channels with the dignity and restraint that she would have wanted, but the impact rippled through the nation and around the world with the force of genuine grief. William had been by her side through the final night, holding her hand as her breathing grew gentler, and finally stopped altogether just as the first light of dawn touched the windows of their private apartment. The children had said their goodbyes the evening before, their young faces showing a mixture of sadness and love that would remain etched in their father's memory forever. Within hours of the announcement, flowers began appearing at the gates of royal residences across the country. Unlike previous royal deaths where protocol often guided public response, Catherine's passing sparked a more personal and intimate form of mourning. People brought not just formal bouquets but handmade cards, children's drawings, and small personal items that reflected the deep connection they had felt with someone who had seemed to genuinely care about their lives and struggles. The queue of mourners outside Buckingham Palace stretched for miles, with people from every walk of life waiting patiently to sign condolence books and pay their respects. The diversity of the crowd reflected Catherine's broad appeal: young mothers with children in strollers, elderly couples who had followed her entire royal journey, teenagers who had been inspired by her advocacy for mental health awareness, and countless others whose lives had been touched in some way by her work and example. Parliament was recalled for a special session to pay tribute to Catherine's life and service. Members from all political parties spoke with genuine emotion about her contributions to British society, her modernization of the monarchy, and her role as a devoted mother and wife. The tributes avoided partisan politics, focusing instead on the unifying effect of her presence and the loss felt across all segments of society. International leaders expressed their condolences with unusual warmth and personal reflection. President Biden spoke of her grace during state visits, while other world leaders shared memories of her natural diplomacy and genuine interest in global humanitarian causes. The responses revealed how effectively Catherine had represented Britain on the world stage, building relationships that transcended formal protocol. The arrangements for her funeral required delicate balancing of state ceremonial requirements with the more intimate farewell that her family and the public desired. Westminster Abbey was chosen as the venue, the same place where she and William had been married, creating a poignant connection between the joyful beginning of their public life together and this final goodbye. William threw himself into the funeral, planning with an intensity that worried his closest advisors, but which served as his way of processing his grief while ensuring that every detail honored Catherine's memory appropriately. He insisted on including elements that reflected her personality: music she loved, flowers from gardens she had tended, and readings from books she had shared with their children. The children's involvement in the funeral preparations was carefully managed, with child psychologists helping to determine how much participation would be healthy versus overwhelming. George expressed a desire to read a poem during the service, while Charlotte wanted to ensure her mother's favorite flowers were included in the arrangements. Louis, still very young, simply wanted to carry something that belonged to his mother. The media coverage during the days leading up to the funeral struck a tone of respectful reflection rather than sensationalism. Documentaries about Catherine's life focused on her charitable work, her role in modernizing the monarchy, and the genuine affection she had earned from people around the world. The coverage helped the public process their own grief while celebrating the positive impact she had made. Charitable organizations that Catherine had supported experienced unprecedented donations in her memory, as people looked for meaningful ways to honor her legacy. The children's mental health charities she had championed received enough funding to expand their programs nationwide, while environmental causes she had supported saw similar surges in both financial support and volunteer participation. The night before the funeral, William made the decision to take his children to see their mother lying in state at Westminster Hall. The private visit, conducted after public viewing hours had ended, allowed them to say their final goodbyes in the peaceful atmosphere that Catherine would have preferred. The sight of the three young royals standing quietly beside their mother's coffin moved even the ceremonial guards to tears. On the morning of the funeral, London awakened to an atmosphere unlike anything seen in recent memory. The streets were lined with people who had traveled from across Britain and around the world to pay their respects. The crowd was notable for its quiet dignity and the visible emotion of those who had come to say goodbye to someone they felt they had personally known and loved. The service itself balanced the grandeur expected of a royal funeral with the personal touches that reflected Catherine's life and values. The music included pieces she had loved, performed by choirs from schools she had visited and orchestras from organizations she had supported. The flowers were arranged in the simple, natural style she had preferred, filling the ancient abbey with the scents and colors of an English garden. William's eulogy was perhaps the most difficult speech of his life, but also the most important. He spoke of Catherine not just as a princess or public figure, but as a wife and mother whose love had transformed his life, and whose example would guide their children forever. His words painted a picture of a woman who had found joy in simple pleasures, while fulfilling the complex demands of royal duty with grace and wisdom. The funeral procession through London allowed millions of people to participate in the farewell, either in person or through television coverage that reached every corner of the globe. The sight of William walking behind his wife's coffin, flanked by his 3 children, created one of the most poignant images in royal history. The spontaneous applause that broke out along the route reflected the genuine affection and respect that Catherine had earned during her years of service. The burial took place in a private ceremony at Windsor, in a location chosen by Catherine herself overlooking the gardens where she had spent so many peaceful hours. Only immediate family attended this final farewell, allowing them to grieve privately while knowing that the entire world shared their sense of loss. As the sun set over Windsor Castle on the day of Catherine's funeral, the nation began the long process of adjusting to life without someone who had become not just a royal figure but a source of inspiration and comfort for millions of people who had never met her but felt her loss as deeply as if they had. 6 months after Catherine's funeral, William stood in the newly completed Children's Mental Health Center that bore her name, watching as young patients and their families used the bright, welcoming spaces that had been designed according to her specific vision. The building represented everything she had hoped to achieve, a place where children could receive support without stigma, where families could find hope, and where her belief in the importance of early intervention could continue to change lives. The Catherine Foundation had been established within weeks of her death, consolidating all her charitable work under a single organization that could expand her impact far beyond what she had been able to achieve in her lifetime. William served as patron, but the day-to-day operations were managed by many of the same people who had worked closely with Catherine, ensuring that her approach and values continued to guide every program and initiative. George, now carrying himself with the dignity and responsibility that his mother had begun to instill in him, had surprised everyone by asking to make his first official public appearance at the opening of a school garden program, inspired by his mother's love of horticulture. His brief speech, delivered with remarkable composure for someone so young, spoke of how his mother had taught him that growing things required patience, care, and hope for the future. Charlotte had channeled her grief into art, creating a series of paintings that captured her memories of time spent with her mother. The local art teacher who had been working with her described the pieces as remarkably sophisticated for someone her age, filled with color and emotion that spoke to her deep connection with Catherine. Several of the paintings now hung in the children's wing of the hospital, where Catherine had made her final public appearance. Louis, still young enough to speak of his mother in the present tense, had become the family's source of innocent wisdom and unexpected comfort. His matter-of-fact acceptance of her absence, combined with his vivid memories of their time together, helped his father and siblings navigate the complex emotions of grief and adjustment. His unguarded questions and observations often provided exactly the perspective they needed during difficult moments. William had returned to his royal duties with a newfound sense of purpose, understanding that his work was no longer just about duty, but about continuing the legacy that he and Catherine had built together. His speeches now carried a depth of emotion and personal experience that resonated with audiences in ways that surprised even his closest advisors. His first major address since Catherine's death, delivered at a conference on mental health awareness, received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. The Queen, despite her advanced age, had become a pillar of strength for William and the children, sharing wisdom gained from her own experiences of loss while helping them understand their roles in preserving Catherine's memory. Her decision to establish an annual award in Catherine's name, recognizing young people who demonstrated exceptional service to their communities, ensured that future generations would continue to be inspired by her example. The gardens at both Windsor and Kensington Palace had been transformed into living memorials, with new plantings chosen specifically to bloom throughout the year, ensuring that color and beauty marked every season. Visitors often remarked on the peaceful atmosphere of these spaces, where Catherine's love of nature continued to provide comfort and reflection for anyone who needed it. International recognition of Catherine's impact came in the form of scholarships, research programs, and policy initiatives established in her memory by governments and organizations around the world. The Catherine Protocol for Early Childhood Mental Health Intervention was adopted by several countries, while the Catherine Scholarship Program provided educational opportunities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who showed promise in areas she had championed. The annual memorial service held at Westminster Abbey on the anniversary of her death had become one of the most attended events in the royal calendar, drawing not just dignitaries and officials but ordinary people whose lives had been touched by her work. The service celebrated her life rather than mourning her death, featuring music, readings, and tributes that reflected the joy and purpose she had brought to everything she did. Publishers had approached William about authorizing an official biography, but he had chosen instead to support a series of books focusing on Catherine's charitable work and its continued impact. The proceeds from these publications funded new initiatives in her name, ensuring that even these posthumous projects served the causes she had cared about most deeply. The children's schools had worked closely with grief counselors to ensure that George, Charlotte, and Louis received appropriate support while maintaining as normal a routine as possible. Their teachers reported that all three had shown remarkable resilience, with each child finding their own way to honor their mother's memory while continuing to grow and develop their individual personalities and interests. Photography exhibitions featuring images from Catherine's public life had toured the country, but the most moving displays were often the informal pictures that captured her interactions with ordinary people during her various engagements. These images told the story of someone who had genuinely connected with people from all walks of life, leaving lasting impressions that went far beyond the formal requirements of royal duty. The cottage in Norfolk, where the family had spent their final months together, had been preserved exactly as Catherine had left it, serving as a private retreat where William and the children could return whenever they needed to feel close to her memory. The garden she had planted with the children continued to flourish, tended now by a local gardener who understood the emotional significance of every flower and vegetable patch. Medical research programs funded in Catherine's memory were making significant advances in the understanding and treatment of the condition that had taken her life. While these developments came too late to help her, they offered hope to other families facing similar diagnoses, fulfilling her final wish that her experience might somehow help others avoid the same tragedy. The impact of Catherine's life extended beyond formal, charitable work to the countless individual moments of kindness and connection that had characterized her approach to public service. Letters continued to arrive at the palace from people sharing stories of brief encounters with her that had left lasting positive impressions, demonstrating how she had understood that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the greatest impact. As the first anniversary of her death approached, William reflected on how her influence continued to shape not just his own life and the lives of their children, but the broader work of the monarchy and the countless people who had been inspired by her example. Her legacy was not contained in monuments or institutions, but lived on in the daily choices of ordinary people who had learned from her that service, kindness, and genuine care for others were the most powerful forces for positive change in the world. The nation that had wept at her farewell had found ways to transform grief into action, ensuring that Catherine's belief in the power of compassion and service would continue to make a difference in lives yet to be touched by her enduring influence.